let's get down to business. Give you one more night to get this. We've had a million nights just like this. So let's get down to business.
G'day Andrew, so interesting enough, there's been so many threats that we've seen recently in the OT space, like a whole bunch of operations technology being taken down, sometimes by a sophisticated actor, sometimes by someone not overly sophisticated. So now, what do you think is happening in the OT space from a threat perspective?
Well, it's interesting, Glenn. I think the threats are coming thick and fast from all types of malicious intent, from nation state, complex, sophisticated attacks to script kiddies and kids doing experimenting, from internal staff in organisations getting new software and new toys and just trying new things. So, and as a result of that, we're seeing an acceleration in government starting to enforce controls and organisations to start to actually take security a little bit more seriously and in a structured way that makes them put together a program.
Do you think we are that exposed, like from sort of, all those different industry verticals that are now considered part of the critical considered a critical infrastructure entity? Do you think that we've got a fair bit of risk that we've digested across those sectors up until now?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is that I feel like we don't know what we don't know about the width and depth of the real, the volume of attacks, the type of attacks, and the bits of the components of people's architectures that are actually being attacked. And so I think that the more conversations I have with clients about the program of work that they need to do to be able to build their security posture, and those conversations are started. There's usually 6 things that I talk to clients about. The first one being a risk assessment, and it means it's a risk assessment that's not just sort of what we think is a good idea. It's using something like NIST as a framework to do your risk assessment against, and it's making sure that you've got a heat map of all the different high-level categories and picking a few controls within those categories to do your heat map against. And that starts to give you a checklist of where you're really at in terms of your security posture. And you can take that checklist and you can give it to the board or to the risk committee, and they can take it to the board, and they can, or as part of the board, and that can start to set an organisation up for the second phase, which is to do a strategy. And the strategy basically is a document that says these are all the controls or compensating controls and risk mitigation things that we need to put in place. And this is how long it's going to take us to implement them. This is how much budget we think we're going to need to be able to do those kind of things. And then once they've got that strategy documentation, they can go to the third phase, which is the documentation phase, which is possibly the largest and most difficult phase, because you need to develop policy, process and procedure around using one of the standards. So if you've identified a standard that you want to work with, and it doesn't matter if it's 27001, Australian Government's ISM, or NIST, or 62443 specifically for control systems, you've got this checklist of controls that you need to put together and document all your things that you're going to do in order to achieve a compliant state against those standards. And once you've got all that documentation and all of that done, you're really starting to identify the gaps in your capability and put together where Fortinet plays is where the component layer of that security architecture that is the glue that holds systems together, and the technology that enables you to have to throw a security blanket across the architecture so you can achieve your desired state. So once we've got all that sort of thing done, we then move to the fourth phase. Fourth phase is actually implementation. So the implementation is where you do your proof of concept, your factory acceptance testing, your site acceptance testing, and once you've got all of that, your product installed, you can then get testing done. So you can do red teaming and penetration testing, all those kinds of things, to make sure that the architecture that you've deployed is as robust as you would like it to be. And so I encourage organisations to do as much testing as they possibly can, because without it, you don't really know. If you haven't done it, you don't really know.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of plans that were made over the years, not even just in the OT space, that were a really nice plan, but then sat on the shelf and were never never exercised.
Absolutely. And so the fifth phase is the monitoring and incident response capability. And it's where we look at putting tools in place that can take logs and can access devices across the network and report on them from an operational point of view, from a security point of view, and from a business point of view. Is everything doing what it should be doing? And then if we do have an incident, the second part of that is the incident response capability. Can we identify what's been breached? Can we isolate it? Can we put together our remediation plan? And if we've got that incident response plan done really well, and one of the things with that I'm trying to encourage a lot of people to do is a full tabletop walkthrough. So they've worked through, they've got their plan, and they've got the CEO and the marketing director and all those kind of people in the room, and they workshop, well, if we've got this breach, we've shut down effectively whatever it is that we do. What are we doing about it? How are we fixing it? What's our return to normal plan? All those kinds of things. How are we going to mitigate or compensate our clients and get ourselves back up and running? And then the final sixth step of a program of work is training. Two types of training I like to talk to people about. The first one is just basic security awareness training. And the second part is, so you can identify phishing emails or what malicious stuff kind of looks like. And then the second phase is going back over the documentation and the policy and procedure that you've developed and training everybody within the organisation to identify what it all looks like and how they can get access to it. And when you do that, you actually start to see the organisation starting to develop a really solid, secure security culture. So everybody's thinking about security in development, physical security in terms of helping protect the organisation from the front gate to the core of what operationally that organisation does.
So Andrew, that's fantastic in terms of, I guess, that we're starting to get in front of it. I know with some of the big organisations, like some of the mining organisations, it was always sort of a bit of a federated approach to how they delivered some of their capabilities. So while they might have a really, really good security policy for example, in the corporate, one of the other external entities within the business would actually be delivering capability in the OT space and not necessarily as well resourced in terms of security. So I guess that leads us to a couple of things. One is now we're seeing things like the critical infrastructure legislation come to the fore that's going to force organisations to bring in holistic cyber security to their OT. And then secondly, how do you think us as in Fortinet, which has got such a broad capability, is able to help these organisations stand up and face something like this new Act of Parliament?
The Act is probably going to come into law July-ish is when it's kind of talking. And what it's going to do is going to force organisations that really haven't spent a lot of time and money on their cybersecurity posture to actually start to do stuff. So there's effectively three things that I see that the organisations are going to need to do. The first one is a proper risk assessment, so they understand what assets they've got in play, where they sit, what the posture of each item is, and then produce a proper risk mitigation plan that they can start to work with. And it doesn't matter if it's they come up with an idea that says, oh, well, we've got nothing. No, that's a good start. At least you've considered it and you've got something, and now you've got somewhere where you can go.
At least you're facing evidence-based factual risk.
Exactly.
Although it will be a lot.
And so then what will happen is once they've got that architecture, that visibility of that architecture, they'll start to put together some tools that will enable you to actually monitor what's going on within that architecture, and so that you'll be able to hopefully detect an event if and when it actually occurs. And I think that's the effective aim of the Act, is to try and get organisations to acknowledge that they've got security risks, document those risks, monitor and manage those risks and mitigate them moving forward. And then unfortunately, if they are breached, being able to report on those. And the challenge, I think, for the government and for organisations is going to be another component of it, which is trying to actually manage their supply chain to the organisations across the 11 sectors. And I think we still need to do some more work on defining what a organisation that is part of the supply chain actually looks like. And it could be as simple as if they have some sort of electronic direct connection for you to share information or to monitor something, to have remote access to monitor your system, then because they've got a login effectively to your system, they are definitely part of your supply chain. And I think we're going to realistically have some time to come up with those things as we move forward.